Okay, so before we get started writing code, we need to set up a compiler. And you might ask yourself, why do we need to set up a compiler? Well, although we could use basic JavaScript, what we'd like to use is newer language features in JavaScript. In order to have those available to us, we need to set up a compiler. Let me explain a little bit more. Basically, Typescript or Babel are JavaScript compilers. TSC is the name of the TypeScript compiler, and Babel is the Babel compiler. What does it do? So it compiles newer language features written in TypeScript or ES 2015 and beyond to earlier versions of JavaScript, so commonly ES5 at this point. This earlier version of JavaScript is supported in all web browsers that you're likely targeting, i.e. 9 and above. So in that case, you can count on the code running in these older browsers, even though you're using newer language features. This compilation is often more specifically referred to by a fancy word called transpilation. Transpilation refers to a specific kind of compilation. Instead of going source code to bytecode like we might traditionally think in Java, transpilation refers to a specific kind of compilation going from source code to source code. So just a fancy word for a compiler that goes source code to source code. To see this in action, we can visit either of the playgrounds, or Babel calls it a REPL here for the languages. So let's jump out and look at Babel's compiler. Here, if we have some code on the left-hand side, this is the new JavaScript that we're going to write. And we'll see here on the right how it gets translated after being run through the Babel compiler. So let's start off with a basic thing. Let's just write a function called test. I need to close my parentheses, and I will just console.log out the word test. And let's see if I can type this. I don't have any kind of help in this editor. And then I'll invoke that function down here. As you can see, what's the difference between this code on the left and this code on the right? Besides this use strict statement, nothing, right? And that's the key thing here. These are fine taking current JavaScript language features and translating them to the same thing. But if we wanted to use something like a class, so let's say I create a class of person. We're going to do this, go over classes and do this quite a bit more in the next section. But let's say I add a constructor. And in that constructor, I set a couple properties. Let's just set first name for now. So I'll say this.first. It's creating a property or a member variable on here equals first. So look what it writes over here on the other side. So the reason it's writing more complicated code over here on the right is because it's readying it for being run in like IE9 or an older browser that doesn't know about JavaScript classes. If I run this in Chrome right now, Chrome is totally going to recognize this code as valid JavaScript. But over here, we have to use things like the prototype and so forth to implement that class function in ES5 code. So the same thing, same exact kind of thing is happening in the TypeScript Playground. Let me re-click that again so I open a new window. And they have some kind of pre-configured examples here. So I'll pick one here. We have some classes. Let's see if I can find an example that's a little more bare bones. Classes 101. All right, so here I'm just working with classes like I wrote the code before. And you'll notice that on the right-hand side, though, you might be surprised to see that the code comes out looking about exactly the same over here as it does here, except for some white space differences. So the reason is because right now, this environment, if I click on config, it's set with a target to output ES 2017, so to output very futuristic JavaScript. But if I switch this to ES5, you'll notice that the code changes to something a lot more similar to what we saw with Babel over here. So hopefully that gives you a feel for what's going on. We'll see it more as we get into these various new language features and learn them. But the idea is that you write with the confidence that you can use the new language features, and it gets compiled down to code that will confidently run in older browsers.